John Madden, yes, that John Madden, said Joe Namath was the toughest and the best quarterback he ever faced. It was the only time, someone needs ear rubs, it was the only time in my career I walked into the opposing locker room, walked up to a player, shook his hand, pointed at him and said, "Man, you're the greatest." Wow! Wow! How many people know that quote these days? Now that was 1997, and if you don't believe me, go to another YouTube channel, not my channel. Type in 1997 John Madden Super Bowl special and go to minute 48. And I paraphrased it. You can hear the exact quote. It's even better, of course, coming out of his mouth when you hear exactly what he says. So, here we are about 28 years later from 1997, and I see everybody on YouTube, you millennials, going, that's rude, you shouldn't point, John. You millennials, going, Joe Namath's overrated. Joe Namath's overrated. Well, how have we gotten to that point? How have we gotten from the, now by the way, John Madden is, if you don't know, was the winningest coach in NFL history in terms of winning percentage. 10 or more seasons. There was another guy who coached like 5 or 6 seasons, had a better percentage. But how did we get from that point A to point B so quickly? How have we rewritten history so quickly about Joe Namath? And there's a couple keys, and I'm going to go over each of them, but the words rewritten history are really kind of what has happened. And it happens in sports, it happens in history, and it just kind of happens over time. So you'll see that as you go. Now, first of all, let me say, oh, by the way, John Hamilton, I'm a freelance writer here in Yorktown, Virginia. Some of my articles, sports write-ups, and humorous American history quizzes have appeared in a couple local newspapers. And yes, I'm old. I'm 62. I was born in 1963. However, I'm not one of these old guys that say, oh, Tom Brady's no good, Patrick Mahomes is no good. Now, I agree that those two are in the GOAT argument. I've got now Mahomes, he needs 2 more years. He's still 3-2 in Super Bowls, and he's amazing. And Tom Brady, 7 Super Bowls, that's crazy. I don't know if he's the GOAT, though, because, you know, Bill Russell had all those championships. Was he the GOAT? I don't know, Belichick's defense had a lot to do with it. I kind of go with Joe Montana. But anyway, that's another topic. But the greatest skill set was Joe Namath, but it just kind of didn't work out. So let's go over point by point why you think he's overrated, and I'm going to tell you each point why he's not. And by the way, feel free to comment below. I won't, as long as you don't curse in there, I won't erase your comment even if you disagree with me. So point number 1, the Mel Blount rule in 1979. In 1979, Mel Blount was this just a killer defender. And he was just bashing wide receivers off the line. What a lot of people don't know is back then you could just hit the wide receiver off the line. And so the Mel Blount rule, they made a rule that you couldn't touch them 5 yards off the line. And that was a game changer. That, you could argue that's the biggest rule change in NFL history. And after that, those receivers like Jerry Rice came on along in the 80s, Steve Largent, and they could just get a good running start. And that's when that West Coast offense thing really got a hold. And Chris Carter, those are the 3 greatest receivers of that era. So Google that Mel Blount rule. Number 2, the Ultra Pebble football. This was the other big change, 1981, so 79-81. Could you mind? Yo, okay, I'll kiss this. So the Ultra Pebble football, more ear rubs. What you don't know is before 1981, the football didn't have those little pebbles. They look like pixels on the football, and it was smooth. And they say they're the same size, but those old footballs felt a little fatter in the middle because we called the new ball, the 81 ball, the Nerf ball. And it was much easier to throw. I quarterbacked a couple flag football teams in college. Turns out I wasn't a great athlete. I won a city bowling title. That was about it. But the Ultra Pebble football, if you can find the old football from 79 earlier, and the night football with the 2 white stripes on it was even slipperier. And so old games used to have like 8 interceptions and 9 fumbles. I mean, it wasn't unheard of to have these crazy numbers of interceptions and fumbles, especially in rain. So point number 3, womanizer. Joe Namath was a womanizer, right? Ty Cobb, Babe Ruth, Wilt Chamberlain, Joe Namath, who are all kind of in the outs now in the sports world, those 4 guys. They were all known as being ladies' men, and that's not cool nowadays. Even James Bond, right? So that kind of has hurt the reputation of all those guys. Number 4, shoulder pads. Back then, the shoulder pads were a lot bigger. The helmets, the shoes, everything was a lot heavier, bulkier. Everything now is so much more sleek, and the game today is much faster. And no doubt the athletes, the old game was much slower, more physical the athletes stay, jump higher, they run faster, no question. So 2 different games. Number 5, quotes by coaches. Not only did you hear my John Madden quote, Vince Lombardi said that Joe Namath was like Elvis Presley and Billy the Kid. That was an old school way of saying he was the GOAT. My parents and grandparents used to use that one. Bear Bryant, University of Alabama, some said the greatest college coach in history, said that Joe Namath was the greatest quarterback and athlete he's ever saw. And that was before he hurt his knees. And Bill Walsh, who coached Joe Namath and Steve Young, 2 guys that are in the GOAT argument, and he said that Joe Namath was the stylish, most amazing quarterback he'd ever seen. I don't remember that exact quote. Point number 5. Oh, no, that was 5. Number 6, no short TD passes. Back in those days, before 1979, before that Mel Blount rule, if you go watch the video, they rarely threw into the end zone from inside the 5, or even the 20, really. They ran it in with you had the fullback in the front and the halfback in the back in the I formation, and they ran it in. So that's why that's part of the reason Joe Namath's touchdown interceptions numbers are like, oh, there's touchdowns are too low and his interceptions are too high. There are 9 Hall of Fame quarterbacks with more interceptions than touchdowns. Bet you didn't know that one. 7, AFL career. People forget Joe Namath was the Dr. J, the Michael Jordan of the AFL for 5 years before the NFL. Just like Dr. J was the Michael Jordan of the ABA for 5 years before the NBA. So you can parallel those two, Dr. J and Joe Namath. They both had 5-year careers where they were the undisputed superstars of their league for 5 years. The only difference is when Dr. J came to the NBA, he had a long career without injuries. Joe Namath got to the NFL, had a couple years, he was done. The knees, they didn't have the microscopic knee surgeries then. Point number 8. You don't know this. Most people don't know this. Joe Namath literally retired as the NFL's all-time leading passer. People go, well, he wasn't that great. He had the 1 Super Bowl win. No, he was the NFL all-time leading passer, 197.6 yards per game. Now that's about 100 yards higher now. Patrick Mahomes is the all-time leader, about 300 yards per game. But they throw a lot more now. So they both pass for about 7-8 yards a game. In fact, bet you don't know this, almost every major quarterback in history, hundreds of them, average 7 yards per pass. Yeah, bet you didn't know that. There's a few that are a little more like 8 or 9, and a few down at 6, but almost all of them. You can look that stat up. Okay. Number 9, the Super Bowl return was real tough. There was only one wild card in each conference back there. And Joe Namath had, guess who? Don Shula and the Miami Dolphins in his division. He wasn't going to beat them because the Jets really weren't that good. And then guess who fought for the wild card every year? Chuck Noll's Pittsburgh Steelers and John Madden's Oakland Raiders. Yeah, he couldn't get by. He had the Raiders, Dolphins, and Steelers in his way to go to the Super Bowl, so it was almost impossible. Interceptions as punts on 3rd downs back then. John Madden used to say, you can Google it, John Madden, an interception is as good as a punt. On 3rd down, Joe Namath, Ken Stabler, Brett Favre even in his career later on chucked it down there. If they intercepted it, no big deal. They didn't pad their stats. They didn't care. They were those 3. That's why they call them gunslingers. They didn't care. They didn't care about padding their stats and avoiding, interceptions to keep that quarterback rating high. Goalpost for it. If you look at the old videos back then, the Joe Namath videos, the goalposts were at the goal line, and that really was confusing. And when you got down there, it was tougher to get that ball in that end zone. The receivers, now there were times when the receivers actually used it to their advantage. So, but there's kind of a trade-off there. Number 12, knee surgeries. Yeah, they didn't have the arthroscopic knee surgeries back then the same. And if you go on Twitter, there's a funny thread where somebody has shown a Joe Namath knee brace, and people are making all the Civil War jokes. It really does look like that. So it was just a totally different time. 13, 4 championships. Joe Namath is the only human being in history to win the high school championship, the college championship, the AFL championship, and the NFL championship. He's the only human ever out of 100 billion humans. Pretty cool, huh? Now, of course, the AFL is gone, so it's not going to happen again. So he's going to always hold that record. Number 14, a hunchback. People have commented on him walking down the beach. He's got a hunchback. He literally got beat up so bad, and that's how hard the hits were. It was like Ric Flair, and Ric Flair was a buddy of his. It was like pro wrestling. I make the analogy, pro football back then used to be like pro wrestling or roller derby. Now it's like Formula One or soccer. Not a lot of contact, but really sleek and really fast. Or back then, pro football was like gladiator combat. Now it's like flag football. It's just very athletic and quick, but not a lot of contact. I'm not saying one's better than the other, but you just can't compare them. They're both good. You know, the athletes are amazing today, no question. But they were amazing then, too. Just don't judge their... Same thing, Terry Bradshaw. You really watch him. He was an incredible quarterback, but people say he's overrated. He really had all the skills, including the intelligence, which he doesn't get credit for because he talks like a hillbilly. 4,000 yards in 14 games. He's the first guy to do it, 4,000 yards, and he did it in 14 games. 16, Dan Marino copied his form. What else do you need to know? Dan Marino, who Joe Montana said was the GOAT. Now, of course, Joe Montana picked Dan Marino because he's from the 80s. That puts himself, Joe Montana, back in the debate, right? Joe Montana's no fool. So, but Joe Montana, and a lot of people say Dan Marino had the quickest release in history. Joe Namath the second quickest. Okay, whew, deep breath. 17, Robo QB. Joe Namath was literally Robo QB. He was the closest to a perfect quarterback. He had the intelligence of Joe Montana, the accuracy of Troy Aikman, the scrambling legs before his knee injury of Patrick Mahomes, the deep passing ability of John Elway, the leadership of General Patton. He had everything. He was like Robo QB. He was meant to be the GOAT of GOATs in American sports. He was what might have been, but it didn't happen. 18, best footwork, best passing form, and drop back form. A lot of there are analysts I've seen that say he's got the best passing form in history. It's just a thing of beauty. His footwork and his drop back form, people call it ballet. You just watch him, watch the video when he drops back. It's like a dancer. Just his passing form, just things of beauty. 19, NFL book, 25 points. I'll have to find this book because I have the NFL in the 70s released an official book. It's this white book. It's kind of thin, but Joe Namath was rated. The NFL itself, official book, picked him number 1, 24 out of 25 points. Archie Manning, by the way, second, 23 out of 25 points. Interesting, both those guys had losing records with their career. They both had bum teams, and that just goes to show back then the quarterback couldn't quite take over like a Brady or Mahomes because running and defense dominated more. And so quarterbacks on bad teams mired through entire careers, and you didn't move around as much. And that's what happened. That's why people think, well, Archie Manning had a terrible... He wasn't good. He had a losing record. No. Same thing with Joe Namath. Number 20, broken cheek and broken wrist. Yeah, he finished one game with a broken cheek, courtesy of huge Ben Davidson from the light beer commercials, and another with a broken wrist. I mean, come on, guys nowadays, they sit out because of their bowl games now, because they don't want to get hurt. I mean, come on. And Jack Youngblood, he finished a Pro Bowl. He played a Pro Bowl with a broken leg. I mean, it was a different time, guys. 21, 5 Pro Bowls. Yeah, a lot of people don't know. Joe Namath went to 5 Pro Bowls in 13 seasons. Almost assuredly would have been 8, but he lost 3 years in his prime, right in his prime, 70 to 72, 73, right there, just like Ted Williams, when Ted Williams had to go over and defend our country and be a pilot instructor. Bet you didn't know he went to 5 Pro Bowls. 22, promote modern quarterbacks on TV. ESPN and Fox, they're going to build up Mahomes and Brady and all the modern guys. Why? Money. The money's huge now. Their salaries. They'll lose their jobs. They can't really make Brady or Mahomes any better, so they kind of tend to make the old guys look worse. You know, those guys weren't as good. It's just smart marketing, right? It's all about the money. 23, the patent of QBs. Okay, I mentioned that before. He literally... Dan Patrick on his post said Joe Namath was not a great field leader. And I'm like, he literally was the General Patton. Dan Patrick hurt his reputation with that. He literally was the General Patton of field leaders. They followed him in that game against the Colts and trusted him. And he made the right decisions. He didn't pass in that fourth quarter. He called his audibles at the line. Just a brilliant, brilliant football mind, which he doesn't really get credit for because he was a playboy and a pretty boy. Like Brad Pitt. Really a great actor, but he really has never gotten the credit because he's a pretty boy. Keith Urban. 24, sell shoes and jerseys. I mentioned that already. They didn't have that money back then. Back then, as Frank Gifford mentioned, a lot of those guys worked. You know, they were plumbers and firemen. Now, the money's just huge. The agents, there's millions of dollars involved. Those shoes and jersey contracts, millions, billion. I mean, Patrick Mahomes, what's he making, $500 million? I mean, it's crazy. You know, $500 million is $500 million. Okay, 25, intangibles. John Madden used to do that thing on TV where he checked all the boxes, and that last one was intangibles. Those little things, that special, he just had it, like a great actor. You know, he just had those little extras on the field. He just had that thing where the players followed him. Just something certain guys have. He had it. You know, Elvis Presley, Billy the Kid. 26, the Roy Williams rule. The Roy Williams rule was, there's something called a horse collar tackle, and if you Google this, it's kind of gruesome to watch. Roy Williams hurt 3 guys. He would run out from behind you and grab you right by your collar and pull you down. Yeah, they banned that. 27, the Ben Davidson rule, Big Ben, okay, which I mentioned earlier. I think he took off somebody's helmet and threw it around like Randy White did one time. They banned that, where if somebody's helmet came off, they had to stop the play. I mean, come on. But yeah, Ben Davis used to swing that helmet. Somebody knocked the helmet off, he still hit you. It was crazy. It literally was pro wrestling. That's why, you know, Ric Flair and Joe Namath idolized each other. 28, the horse collar tackle. Okay, that's the Roy Williams rule. 29, the hip drop tackle. That was just banned in 2024. You'd come up behind a guy and kind of grab his hips and swivel him and bring him down. That was just banned this past year. 30, the Carson Palmer rule and the Tom Brady rule. You can go Google both of those. Both of those involve hitting quarterbacks low around their feet. Yeah, they used to just take out. You go back and you watch those things, boy, they used to take out your knees and your legs. Let's go on now. That's huge. It's huge. That's why Namath, his knees, and those old guys. So many knee surgeries now. You never see that anymore. You know, they just can't touch. So they can't grab you high and they can't grab you low. Everything's right in the middle. It's just so much safer now. And I mean, the guys are huge now. They're hitting hard. They're so big and fast. If they hit like that high and low, they'd kill guys. Hard to sack. Joe Namath, a lot of people don't know this, he's one of the hardest quarterbacks to sack statistically in history. I mean, you can find a clip on YouTube. The defender, the lineman's just getting him by the jersey and his hand's here and boom, it's gone. You know, that second fastest release to Marino in history. You just couldn't sack him. You know, he just went forever without being sacked. He was so quick and smart, but that ball, that release, it was just gone. The guys would have him, and before they didn't always call that in the grasp rule. That was kind of later on. But it was just gone. The ball was just gone. You're like, wow. And he could flick it downfield 50 yards, too. In number 32, fantasy football was actually founded in 1962. A lot of you don't know this. By a co-owner of the Raiders, by the way. But back then, it wasn't a thing. See, all of you are into statistics, right? You've gotten, oh, statistics. But remember that old saying, there are lies, there are darn lies, and there are statistics, right? That was Disraeli, the 19th century Prime Minister of England. Statistics can really fool you. And now that everybody's so into everybody's stats, but in 1962, fantasy football, I'll make an analogy, it was maybe like Dungeons and Dragons, like a few people got together and did it. But it wasn't until about 1997 when Yahoo went online with it, it became big. And then there was another big jump around 2006, about 9 years later, when it really took off. Okay, but until then, back in 62, in the 60s and 70s, fantasy football wasn't a big thing. Stats weren't a big thing. Like I said, when we played backyard football, we even did that, an interception is as good as a punt, and the defenders they got caught on and they started knocking them down. So guys would knock it down instead of taking the interception. That was a thing in backyard football and in the NFL. That was actually a thing. Okay, Lester Hayes, Mike Haynes, Google them. Okay, so that's 32 reasons why Joe Namath is not overrated. You still may not agree with me. I think I've sold a few of you. I think a lot of you are shocked by all these stats. I think I've convinced a few of you. Some of you are just not stubborn. You're just not going to change your mind. You think he's overrated. And that's cool. That's cool. I'm stubborn too. I'm like, oh gosh, the modern NFL looks like flag football. It's not as good. And the NBA, there's too much dribbling and three-pointers. So I think we all like the era we grew up in, right? You know, I always like the old Star Wars movies. A buddy of mine's son, he said Phantom Menace was his favorite. And I was like, what? Phantom Menace? Everybody hates that. So it turns out, you know, the younger generation doesn't hate it. So, you know, a lot of it, every 20 years the GOAT changes, right? My dad thought it was Joe DiMaggio and Willie Mays, right? Bill Russell. Different rules. Bob Cousy, he had to dribble with his hand in a cast. I mean, what he did was amazing considering the rules. So, okay. Steph Curry, he's amazing, but different rules. Okay, well, that's it. Hope you enjoyed the video. Woo! That's as fast as I could talk. And leave the comments. Like I said, if you don't curse, I won't erase it. And this is a family channel. See you for the next video. Bye. Oh, that was clumsy. Hey, buddy. What you doing? Say hi. Finn. Banks. What you doing, pretty boy? We did it in under 20 minutes. Say bye.